Hello and welcome to an Affinity Revolution tutorial. My name is Ezra Anderson, and today we're going to design a strand of DNA. To make our DNA, the first thing we're going to do is select the Ellipse tool, and while holding down Shift, we'll click and drag to make a perfect circle. Then we'll remove the fill by pressing on the No Fill icon. Now we'll increase the stroke width by coming over to the Stroke panel. I'll also check on Scale with Object so our circle stroke will change sizes as we resize the circle. Now we'll come to the Contextual toolbar and convert our circle to curves. Now we can edit the individual nodes of our circle. I'll start by selecting the top node, and in the Contextual toolbar, I'll convert it to a sharp node by pressing on this icon. Then I'll select the bottom node and convert it to a sharp node as well. Then I'll press V for the Move tool and make our new shape a little taller and skinnier. Then I'll make our shape a little bit smaller. Finally, I'll reposition our shape. We're now going to duplicate our shape by pressing Command or Control J. Then we'll bring down this duplicate so it aligns with the bottom part of the original shape. We'll now duplicate this second shape by pressing Command or Control J. As you can see, the third shape moved the exact same distance that we moved the second shape, so it's already perfectly aligned with the bottom part of our second shape. Next, I'm going to make a rectangle by using the Rectangle tool. And just so we can better see what's happening, I'm going to come to the Color panel and switch the Fill and Stroke by pressing on this arrow icon. Then I'll press V for the Move tool and reposition this rectangle. The rectangle is now covering the top half of our original shape. While holding down Shift, I'll click on the shape that we made. Then I'll use the subtract Boolean operation. If we look closely, the subtract Boolean operation has created a small problem. The problem is that the subtract operation has closed the top part of our shape. This is not what we want, so I'm going to press Command or Control Z to undo. To fix this, I'm going to select all of our shapes except for the rectangle. Then I'll come up to the top to Layer, and then scroll down to Expand Stroke. Now we will no longer have that problem. To see this, I'll select the rectangle, and then while holding down Shift, I'll select our original shape. Then I'll use the subtract Boolean operation. As you can see, the top part of our shape is no longer closed. I'll repeat this process for the bottom part of our DNA strand. First, I'll make a rectangle, and then I'll reposition the rectangle. Then with the rectangle and our shape selected, I'll use the subtract Boolean operation. Before we continue our design, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can better see what we're doing. Next, we'll pull out the Rectangle tool and click and drag to make a thin rectangle. You can make your rectangle as thick or as thin as you want, but I'm going to make mine a little bit thinner by coming down to the Transform panel and decreasing its height. Then I'll press V for the Move tool. We're now going to duplicate this rectangle by pressing Command or Control J. Then we'll bring the second rectangle down. Then we'll press Command or Control J a few more times. We want to make it so all of these rectangles fit inside our DNA strand. One way that we could do this would be to individually resize all of these rectangles to make them thin enough so that they fit inside of the strand. Fortunately, there's an easier way. First, we're going to select all of these objects by clicking and dragging. Then we'll use the divide Boolean operation. Now all of these objects have been divided by each other. That means this rectangle outside of the DNA strand is a shape all on its own, which we can select and easily delete. One problem you might run into, though, is if you try to select all of the rectangles at the same time. With all of the rectangles selected, and then you press delete, you'll also delete the left half of our DNA strand. So I'm going to press Command or Control Z to undo that. The reason we have this problem is Affinity Designer makes it so when you're clicking and dragging, you'll only select an object if you have it completely inside of your selection marquee. Instead, we need to make it so Designer will select these rectangles if our selection marquee only touches the left edge of them. To do this, we'll need to change our preferences. We can do this by coming up to the top to Affinity Designer, Preferences. Then we'll come to our Tools Preferences. Here we can check on Select Object when intersects with Selection Marquee. This means the selection marquee just barely has to touch a layer and it will become selected. Now we'll close out of this box. Now I'll just click once to make sure I have nothing selected, and then I'll make a new selection marquee that barely touches the edge of all of these left rectangles. Now they're all selected and I can easily delete them without deleting our DNA strand. I'll do the same thing for the right side. Then we'll select all of these layers and put them in a group by pressing Command or Control G. Let's give our DNA a little bit of color. First, I'll press G for the Fill tool, and then click and drag to make a gradient. Remember that you can hold down Shift to make sure your gradient stays straight. Then I'll change this color stop from gray to turquoise. Then I'll select the white color stop and change its color to light blue. Finally, I'll press V for the Move tool and rotate our DNA strand using this circle at the top. If you want, you can continue to resize your DNA. You now know how to make a beautiful DNA strand in Affinity Designer.